What is up, guys? Welcome back to another UFC prediction video. This weekend, we're going to Perth in Australia. We got Carlos Ulberg versus Dominic Reyes in the main event. I'm very excited for that fight. Without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into the full card predictions. All right, our first fight on the card. A heavyweight bout between Brando Pericic and Elijah Ellison. Look, both of these guys are very, very unknown. 4-1, 5-1. Brando Pericic training out of City Kickboxing. Elijah Ellison, very light record out of America. Look, I'm going to pick Pericic to win the fight via stinky heavyweight decision. I expect a slow, sloppy heavyweight fight in this one. And I guess they're putting him in a position to win, considering he's from Australia. Seems just like a card filler, but yeah. Look, I'm going to take Pericic to win a decision. Next fight on the card, Bedoya versus Mullarkey. I'm going to take Rolando Bedoya to win this one via first round TKO. Look, Bedoya is nothing to write home about. He's lost all of his UFC fights. He's had 3. I remember the split decision to Jai Herbert, I believe it was. Got beat by Chaos Williams. And, he's a decent kickboxer. Doesn't really stand out anywhere. But he is tough. He does have some durability and some decent striking combinations at times. Decent pressure at times. Jamie Mullarkey, however, the only win I can even remember him getting, even though he's been around for a while, is, against Francisco Prado, a very low-level fighter. Chinned by Rufy. He's been chinned plenty of times. Very, very, bad chin. Does not have durability. And at this point in his career, I think he's just one of these types of guys that can't take a shot. And I think that Bedoya is going to get to him, even though, I think on the feet in terms of the technicalities, they're going to be similar in terms of skill. Bedoya, younger, faster, more durable. He's going to be able to just kind of take one to land one. He'll get a TKO first round in this fight against Mullarkey. All right. Next fight on the card, Josias Musasa versus Colby Thicknesse. Both of these guys lost their UFC debut. Colby Thicknesse, though, it was against Alessandro Tuporia, pretty high-level fighter in hindsight. And Josias Musasa, he got finished up bad. Question mark kicked and then rear naked choked against Carlos Vera, who is like a journeyman 38-year-old off the Conor McGregor season of Tough. Very, very bad look. He beat a decent Georgian fighter on the Contender Series, but he's a raw athlete, but he needs to clean up his technical ability. Doesn't really fight with much of a game plan. He has okay defensive grappling, but like I said, just kind of based off of his athleticism, explosive ability. He needs to polish up his skill set. Colby Thicknesse, not the most athletic fighter, but he is pretty technical, good kicking game, decent on the back foot, fights similarly to a Steve Ersag or a Volk. Lower level for sure, but fights similarly. I think that if anybody is going to be having success with grappling in this fight, it's going to be Thicknesse. I think he's going to put more points on the board just in terms of significant strikes. Musasa, he's going to have to win this fight via either knockout or win a decision based on knockdowns and show some improvements with the boxing combinations volume. I think Colby Thicknesse wins this one via decision, purely based off of skill, better ability to fight minute to minute rather than win on moments. I think Thicknesse wins via decision here. Next fight on the card, Petroski versus Cameron Rowston. Look, Cameron Rowston, he's fought on the Contender Series a couple times, lost to Torres Finney, and then recently just got a win via TKO, decent little TKO in that Contender Series fight. Andre Petroski, coming off a loss to Edmund Shabazian, got schooled in that fight. He beat Rodolfo Vieira in the fight before that, which was a decent win. I mean, close fight, but, kind of a slower fight for sure. He's going to be at a speed and striking disadvantage here. Maybe he does something similar to Torres Finney, where he's able to out-grapple Cam Rowston. He doesn't do much damage whatsoever in his fights. I mean, even in the Dylan Budka fight, a very low-level fighter who gets finished up in like 30 seconds via Edmund Shabazian, Petroski's taken him to like a life and death decision. All he really has is grappling and positional control time. Even in a fight against a guy like Josh Fremd, who's like very low level, he's unable to do anything but lay on you. Rowston, if he's able to stuff takedowns, he should win via TKO. Much faster, much better striker. And even in his last two regional fights, I believe he showed improvements with his grappling. I believe winning both of them by sub since the Torres Finney fight. In my opinion, that shows improvements on a fight-to-fight basis. Give me the younger, better striker, Cameron Rowston, to win this one via knockout in the second round. Next fight on the card, Jonathan Micallef versus Elliot. Elliot fought, I forget the guy's name, very talented Korean fighter. He lost via decision, got out-grappled handily in that fight. And, he got a little bit of hype off of two wins that were kind of overrated. What's the guy's name? Basel Hafez was able to knock out Basel Hafez, and then he beat Preston Parsons, in a decision. Neither of those guys are really even UFC level, in my opinion, not at welterweight. And, those are okay wins. He looked all right in those fights, but nothing to write home about. Jonathan Micallef beat Gage Young on the Contender Series. That's a win that has aged decent. Gage Young's an all right fighter, and Micallef pretty much handled that fight. Micallef, very, very talented on the ground with his jiu-jitsu, and his long-rangey striking is also very good as well. I believe he absolutely just put out Anshul Jubilee in his UFC debut, nasty KO shot, and then he was able to beat Unal Ashmoose at lightweight in his last fight. Lighter man skill, Unal Ashmoose, who's a pretty underrated fighter, decent grappling, good hands. Micallef was able to beat him 30-27. Well, it was actually a 29-28. He did lose that last round, but he pretty much dominated that fight outside of the last round where he kind of got a little bit tired. But that's kind of the only negative that we've seen from Jonathan Micallef. I think that he's going to win this fight 30-27. He's got great grappling. We saw that in the Unal fight. I think his striking is a little bit sharper than Elliot. If Elliott's kind of able to push a pace, really gas out Micallef, maybe he has success there, but I think Micallef wins this fight here via decision. All right, our next fight on the card, Rodolfo Bellato versus Navajo Stirling. Look, Navajo Stirling, classic city kickboxing fighter, jabs, leg kicks, lateral movement, teep kicks up the middle, the occasional step-in knee. He's a solid striker, good athlete as well. Doesn't seem to have the kill shot finding ability that we maybe thought. He's been fighting tough guys, Tuko Tokos, hard-headed Tuko Tokos, and Ivan Erslan, who is a decent fighter. So maybe he'll start to get KOs like he did on the Contender Series as he fights different levels of competition, maybe less durable guys than he has been. I'm going to take him to win a decision here over Rodolfo Bellato, where, you look past the Paul Craig fight, nothing really happened in that fight. Close fight with Jimmy the Brute Crute. So, I think Navajo Stirling's honestly better than Jimmy the Brute Crute. And, Rodolfo Bellato going to war with the Horpateria. He's having close fights with lower level guys. I think that Navajo Stirling's the more naturally talented fighter, much better striker. Bellato could maybe implement some grappling, which could give Navajo Stirling some issues, but we saw Stirling, stuff some takedowns in his last two. So I think that he will be able to get a decision in this one. Bellato, he is hard-headed. He is pretty tough. I think Stirling wins another competitive decision, stuffing takedowns, landing jabs, and leg kicks, similarly to his last fight versus Erslan. All right, our next fight on the card. Fat fuck Justin Tafa versus Louis Sutherland. Justin Tafa, I honestly get him and his brother confused. They're both terrible. You think about them getting subbed by Tuko Tokos, leg kicked by DeLima, beaten by Williams. I know Justin Tafa lost to Carl Williams. I believe it was him that fought Carl Williams. But look, Louis Sutherland, he's a Scottish lad. He's tough as nails. And I think he's going to go in there and absolutely beat the brakes off of Justin Tafa. Honestly, I've never seen him fight, but trains at a Great Britain top team. That's a good gym. And, I think that he's more determined. I think he's grittier. And I think he wants it more than Justin Tafa, who has displayed nothing but just mediocre, lackadaisical blobness in the cage. So, yeah, I'm going to pick Sutherland, just purely picking against Justin Tafa. I will never pick the Tafa brothers, ever. So, I'm going to pick against him, and I'm going to go with Sutherland to win this one via TKO, ground and pound TKO. Next fight on the card, we have Tom Nolan versus Charlie Campbell. Charlie Campbell, pretty solid fighter. Lost to Chris Duncan on the Contender Series, but I believe he's been pretty inactive. I think his last fight was a win over Trevor Peek via decision. Decent boxing overall. Okay in terms of his well-rounded ability. He did get taken down a few times by Trevor Peek, though, so that's not necessarily a great look because Tom Nolan, even though Borishev in his last fight where Tom Nolan did take him down a few times, Borishev doesn't have great takedown defense whatsoever. In fact, it's quite bad. But I think that Tom Nolan may have success with the grappling here. And Tom Nolan, the main concern is definitely his durability. We saw him get knocked out by Mota. We saw him get dropped by a very low-level fighter in the fight after that. Looked good in the Borishev fight. He even beat Bogdan Grad on the Contender Series, which is a good win that I rate. Bogdan Grad's a pretty good fighter. But I'm going to pick Tom Nolan to win a decision here against Charlie Campbell. The boxing and the knockout threat of Charlie Campbell is definitely going to be a factor, but I think, Tom Nolan, he has good counter right hands. That's what Charlie Campbell got knocked out with against Chris Duncan. Tom Nolan may be able to hurt him with right hands on occasion. He has good kicking. I think the, long, rangy striking of Tom Nolan, he's better at range. Charlie Campbell is better in the pocket. Tom Nolan, I think he's going to continue to make fight-to-fight improvements. He can mix in the grappling if he needs to. I think it's going to be a very close fight where, Charlie Campbell, maybe he gets a knockdown in the first round. Tom Nolan, kind of kicks at range, gets some takedowns, very timely takedowns in the second 2 rounds, and wins a split decision with a little bit of hometown bias. So, yeah, that's what I'll pick. I'll pick Tom Nolan via very close split decision here in this one. All right, our next fight on the card, we have Jake Matthews versus Neil Magny. Neil Magny, crafty vet, most wins in welterweight history. He finally has been getting some wins recently. That win versus Mike Malott was solid. Took a few losses after that, but he was able to get a good win against Dos Santos last time out. Nice ground and pound in classic Magny fashion. Jake Matthews, he's really a hit or miss fighter for sure. He had a very, very good win via submission against Chidi and Jaquani last time out. Got that in like less than a minute. He's had really bad performances against Semmelsberger. He's had really good performances against Fialho. Like I said, he's hit or miss. But I think the boxing and the wrestling is good here. I think his submission threat, I think his knockout threat is a lot higher than Neil Magny. Definitely way more finishing potential on the Matthews side. Like I said, he's going to be younger, faster. He hits way harder. Neil Magny, he's going to be at an athletic disadvantage. Aside from the reach, he does have crazy reach, but it's not like he has great long-range boxing. Let's be real. He has good clinch work, and unless Jake Matthews kind of ends up playing a slow-paced 50-50 clinch game against the fence with Neil Magny for 3, where he loses a split decision where he shouldn't, I believe that he will win this fight, and I will take him to win by finish. I think Jake Matthews will win via TKO in the second round. Neil Magny, we've seen him get put out multiple times. Morales, Prates, even though those guys are a lot better than Matthews, the durability at some point is going to fail him. He is an aging fighter. I think this is a spot where Jake Matthews does get a finish. So yeah, give me Matthews second round TKO here. All right. Next fight on the card, Jimmy the Brute Crute versus Ivan Erslan. I'm going to pick Ivan Erslan to win this one via decision. I think this is going to be the first Australian that I've picked against on this card, except for Mullarkey. But look, Jimmy the Brute Crute, a draw with Bellato. It was an all right fight, but still not necessarily the best performance in the world. And he had a good bounce back versus Praknia, where he did win by sub, but was kind of getting touched up in that fight before getting it to the ground. And Ivan Erslan is a decent grappler. He's not going to be easily taken down and submitted. If anything, he can get his own grappling offense off as well. It'll be competitive with the grappling. And Jimmy Crute on the feet is not good. Knocked out bad by Jamal Hill. Was getting pieced up by Praknia. Getting hit a lot by Bellato. Ivan Erslan, even though he lost his 2 UFC fights to Kutalaba and to Navajo Stirling, he's a decent fighter. He has decent grappling and decent boxing, and I think it could be a very similar fight to think of Brad Tavares versus Robert Brychek. You know, Brychek really hadn't showed us much, but he's a decent fighter, and I think it's going to be the same case here with Ivan Erslan. Decent boxing, decent forward pressure. He can get scrappy. He can take a shot if he needs to. Decent chin. I think Ivan Erslan, he'll get the better of the boxing exchanges. The grappling exchanges will be close, and I think that he'll win via, 29-28, close decision. So yeah, I mean, this will be a competitive fight. Jimmy Crute definitely has better subs, but Erslan, he does have decent wrestling. I could see this fight mainly taking place on the feet and in a slow, kind of untechnical light heavyweight fight on the feet. A guy like Ivan Erslan can sneak that out via decision. So yeah, give me Erslan via decision. All right, next fight on the card. If this is the co-main, it's a really, really weak co-main. But yeah, we got Jack Jenkins versus Ramon Tavares. Look, Ramon Tavares, I believe he got a controversial split decision win against Series City, which was a rematch from the Contender Series in his UFC debut, where he got flash knocked out by Series City on the Contender Series, and then got absolutely pieced up bad by David Grant. In his next fight, David Grant schooled him, took him to school, gave him a college degree afterwards. He had nothing to offer David Grant. Look, Ramon Tavares, very one-dimensional fighter, doesn't stand out anywhere. He has some decent kind of scrappy hands, but that's literally it. He brings nothing else to the table. I'm going to be taking Jack Jenkins to win this fight via, I'll take him to win via decision. He really hasn't showed us too much finishing ability. He had an okay competitive fight with Chevy Mariscal before he got injured in that one. It's not a terrible look. Even though Herbert Burns is trash, Jack Jenkins showed a decent version of himself in that fight. And he lost last time to Santos, but Santos is a very, very good fighter, much higher level than Ramon Tavares. Gives you a lot more to worry about than Ramon Tavares. So, yeah, I'm going to take Jack Jenkins. He's more well-rounded. He can calf kick better. He can grapple better. And in terms of the boxing, Jack Jenkins, he has good boxing. That's one of his better attributes. He'll be able to match Tavares there. So as long as he doesn't slip on a banana peel and get chinned, I think Jack Jenkins wins this fight via decision. All right, we move on to the main event of the evening. We got Carlos Ulberg versus Dominic Reyes. I'm very excited for this fight. I'm going to be taking Carlos Ulberg to win a decision here in this one. Look, Dominic Reyes, I like him as a fighter. I'm glad he's been able to have this career resurgence, KOing Jacoby, KOing Smith, KOing Nikita Krylov. Very good win streak to be able to get back on track, where we know he had a very, very tragic, career slide off for a few years, losing a robbery to Jones, where that would have flipped the MMA world on its head at the time. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding that. People still recognize that as a big robbery. And then nasty KO to Span, nasty KO to Yuri, nasty KO to Jan Blachowicz. He had a really bad skid for a while, but he's back on track now. Back in the day, he put in some really good work, beating guys like Volkan Oezdemir. That was a close fight, but still, he won that one. And also, beating Chris Weidman back when Weidman was decent. Dominic Reyes, he's put in good work over the years. Carlos Ulberg, he's not a spring chicken whatsoever. He's actually only like a year younger than Reyes, but he's had a lot less fights in the UFC. He's been around a lot less time. Nasty KO on the Contender Series for him. But in his UFC debut, did take his one career loss to Kennedy and Chechekwu. Got pressured, kind of adrenaline dumped in that fight, and let his hands down against the fence. Ended up getting chinned by Kennedy there. He hasn't displayed that flaw since that fight because he's been a lot more conservative with his approach. He's been a lot more defensive. You think back to how Izzy kind of got a lot more defensive during his title reign against Vettori, Cannonier, rather than when he was fighting, Silva, Brunson when he was on the come up. But Carlos Ulberg, against Jung, in that fight, he got his leg chewed up a little bit. And, that definitely came back to haunt him in the Jan Blachowicz fight. I'll talk about that. But displayed really good jabs in that fight, really good counter left hooks. Those are definitely his best punches. He's got good leg kicks as well. Very typical city kickboxing style. Lots of rear hip feints, teeps up the middle, lean back, check hooks. That's completely his style. Lots of lateral movement. He's not very aggressive, unless someone really comes at you, he will swing hard. You look at that Alonzo Minifield fight. Alonzo Minifield rushed at him like a bull. Carlos Ulberg countered him, knocked him down. He definitely has some natural power in his hands for sure, but doesn't really set up good boxing, combinations or, good knockout shots with his hands too much. If you run into a check hook, he can hurt you, but that's about it in terms of the danger factor. He'll chew you up with jabs. You saw that in the Jung fight, and even in the not Carlos Ulberg, in the Volkan Oezdemir fight with Carlos Ulberg, he was putting really good combinations together. People kind of slept on that performance in a way. They thought it was maybe a closer fight than it really was. I thought the Jan Blachowicz fight was much, much closer, where Jan Blachowicz was chewing up the leg, bruised his leg really badly, was landing good shots of his own. Carlos Ulberg kind of won that fight just off of the jab and a little bit of activity and body language realistically. That was a razor close fight with Jan. Comfortably beat Oezdemir, more comfortably than Reyes. I think Reyes had a closer fight with Oezdemir, but that was a more prime version of Oezdemir. I think Carlos Ulberg is going to have the kicking advantage here, the leg kicking advantage, because, he can throw some inside leg kicks. Dominic Reyes, we've seen Ulberg get his leg chewed up via Jan Blachowicz and Jung, but, both of those guys were orthodox. Reyes is southpaw. That outside leg kick's not going to be as big of a problem for Ulberg as it has been in the past, because in my opinion, light heavyweight is only a striking division. No one really grapples at light heavyweight. And his striking flaws, in my opinion, are, heavy leg kicks, heavy pressure. Dominic Reyes is a counter fighter who tends to be really technical, looks for counter lefts, left high kicks. In a technical counter striking battle, I think that's going to favor Carlos Ulberg, where, I can see both of these guys landing clean during the fight, but I still don't trust Dominic Reyes' chin. We know how bad he was getting knocked out a few years ago. And even though he's been on a resurgence, he hasn't been tested in terms of his durability. He hasn't been hit clean in any of these fights that he's been winning because, they've all been quick, easy knockouts. He hasn't been in a long 5-rounder in a long time. I think if Dominic Reyes starts to eat multiple jabs, multiple shots upstairs, he could start to, get the brain scrambled a little bit, and it could start to affect him more than, if Carlos Ulberg gets countered one good time clean. I think Carlos Ulberg hasn't taken the damage, doesn't have the miles on him that Reyes does. I think he may be able to eat a shot and kind of go with it a little more than Reyes. If you know. Even though Reyes is a multi-sport athlete, he's very athletic. I do think that Ulberg maybe is the better athlete in this spot. I think he's going to be a little bit faster, a little bit quicker to the punch, reaction time a little bit sharper. But yeah, I'm going to be taking Carlos Ulberg to win a decision here. I think he can bust up the nose of Reyes, kind of bust it up kind of like Jan did in that fight. I think he can land good check hooks, win the leg kicking battle, and kind of squeak out a boring decision in typical Ulberg fashion. It's going to be a close fight, 48-47, 49-46 on the other two scorecards. But yeah, Reyes, he'll have moments early. He'll land some good body kicks that'll disrupt Ulberg's rhythm at times. He'll land a couple good left straights, but as Ulberg gets settled into the fight, he'll start sticking the straight right to the body, chewing the calf, landing the teep. Reyes, he'll start to rush in a little more, leaving the hands down. Check hook's going to come over the top. So, yeah, give me Ulberg to win a decision here. Looking forward to the fight. But, yeah, I think the striking exchanges will be fun. I think we'll see a couple knockdowns, a couple big moments. I think we do see the final scorecards, though, however. Maybe a late finish for Ulberg, but I still don't see the killer instinct, only countering ability. So, yeah, like I said, Ulberg via decision. If you guys enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. That would mean a lot to me. Enjoy the card this weekend, and have a good rest of your day.